Hi, Professor. This is Tyler Schindel, BU 532. On my final presentation for the class, I decided to focus on the United States of America and the economics, kind of the history of what they've done. And yeah, it was really cool learning about a country I'm not from and excited to dive into this. So just a quick introduction here on what is going to be covered throughout the presentation. It'll be on America's vast economic evolution since its inception in 1776, historical and economic reforms and their impact on the country, as well as focus on the current growth rates and California's economic role as the featured state I decided to research into. So let's get right into it here. California's economic reforms and growth rates throughout history. So, the first thing I wanted to talk about was the New Deal, which happened post Great Depression, and it was created to promote economic recovery after such a catastrophic event, as well as the deregulation era of the late 20th century, and the impact on businesses, innovation, and competition. So, the deregulation era was a lot of restrictions that got lifted off of businesses in order to create creativity as well as competition when the businesses were trying to think of new ways to get back on their feet after such a difficult time in U.S. history. Some recovery and growth trends from 2020 or 2015 to 2022 really highlighted the resilience of America being able to recover from these catastrophic events throughout history. Obviously, later in the presentation, we'll talk about the 2007-2008 fiscal crisis, which was um, uh, very bad for the country and their economic state, as well as obviously COVID in 2020 being able to combat that global pandemic. But as you can see here in 2020 during COVID, there was a negative 2.77% economic growth, which obviously is not very good, but understandable through what we were going through. But they were able to recover back to a 5.95 economic growth in 2021 through different measures such as the stimulus checks and businesses being able to open up after a shutdown year in 2020 for the most part. Diving more into that, the effect of the 2007-2008 fiscal crisis. The origins of this crisis was the housing and financial system failure, based on poor investments and lack of regulation on loans and mortgages, basically giving people the ability to buy houses and get mortgages, loans that wouldn't necessarily qualify for that. And in order to respond to such a drastic drop in the economic state, the government interventions like the Troubled Asset Relief Program, also known as TARP, and monetary policy adjustments that were both put in place to stabilize financial systems, restore economic growth, and mitigate foreclosures. This immediate crisis actually exposed issues within the U.S. financial system that were obviously in place to allow something like this to happen. So regulatory reforms have initiated since this crisis to ensure financial system stability. And luckily, to my knowledge, there hasn't been any other case this drastic since these new regulations have come into play. Looking at California as their comparative advantage compared to the rest of the country, I decided to focus on the technology side of it. So clearly, California is a leader in technology as well as agriculture and entertainment, obviously, with Hollywood down there. But the influence that Silicon Valley has, which is an absolute tech mega hub, not only in America, but also across the world, the influence they have on new companies, jobs, wages, and living costs for their employees is very apparent. Speaking on that, I grabbed a quote here that talks about how housing is 101% higher in Silicon Valley than the national average. So this does have an effect on not only companies recruiting employees to come work there, but also the work-life balance of these employees that are clearly obviously getting a high wage, but also paying a lot more for their living circumstances. So this can be more of an issue than most people think. Also, California's regional economic disparities from kind of their two mega hubs, such as Silicon Valley as well as Hollywood. There are a lot of disparities throughout the state and their economics of scale. And then focusing in on some external economics of scale, there are shared infrastructure, networking opportunities, educational institutions, and global status, obviously through their just global recognition from Hollywood, the movies they're creating, the stars that live in this state, as well as what Silicon Valley's done with obviously Apple, Facebook, other large tech companies. And for internal economies of scale, there would be knowledge, talent concentration, and access to funding. The future of California and some predictions by 2030. The prediction would be for California's trajectory to become a global tech hub by 2030. Not that they already are, but the innovation of the potential AI industry that is really blossoming over the last couple years. Renewable energy and biotech will lead to new companies and large economic impact. So with those industries really taking off, Silicon Valley is expected to explode, and obviously that would be very impactful to the California economy, as well as Proposition 22 getting implemented a couple years back really boosted the idea of gig economy and gig workers, which is essentially contracted workers. It was a big thing that happened with Uber and DoorDash. So these people working for them are not necessarily employees, but independent contractors per se. So they are responsible for their own taxes, but they do get to pick their own work hours. So if the tech industry was able to implement this at all, it would really help them work with task-specific individuals that were really good at this certain area of their job and could work on a task-based basis with these companies. Would also be very beneficial for not only the company because they wouldn't have to be paying these like they wouldn't have to be paying the benefits. Sorry, that's what I was thinking of. The benefits for these employees, as well as like healthcare, paid time off. They wouldn't have to cover any of that. And the contracted worker would be able to be flexible with their work life. So there is a lot of benefit on that end. Lastly, just a demographic shift in the country, or sorry, in the state of California. As the population ages, there are certain industries like healthcare, life insurance, and retirement, as well as leisurely activities, because people are retired, are set to really increase over the next couple years. And just in conclusion, the U.S. historical's resilience and adaptability in economic development, they have been able to go through these really big changes and economic shocks throughout the last decade or two. And just their resilience in being able to recover and adapt to the current state is really, really impressive. And then lastly, their preparedness for future challenges to maintain economic leadership. Just for them to stay on the same path that they've been doing, really lead the global economy and show how powerful of a nation America can be. But yeah, thank you so much. Hope you enjoyed my presentation, and yeah, have a great break.